How to Not Give a Fuck with Dr. Kelly Brogan. One of the hallmarks of becoming a well-fucked woman and a well-fucked person in general is not giving a shit what anyone thinks of you. You don't try not to care, you just don't care. You are so in tune with your inner truth and your inner compass that the naysaying or influences of others just don't touch you. Instead, they bounce off of you or they go over your head, bypassing you entirely. You have raised yourself up to such a level that the only authority you care about is that of your deepest and highest self. You know that you are in alignment with that, and that's its own protection, but it's also its own pleasure and satisfaction. And your sexual energy is a key part of this. As your life force energy, the reproductive power of the universe, once you are in line with it, you own it, you love it, you allow it to move through you, then it begins to propel you forward in your life. I talk about this in all of my videos and podcasts, the power of this energy. How, when you are out of touch with it, you are operating at a deficiency. And when you are in touch with it, you have its superpowers at your disposal to use in every aspect of your life. All of this power is within you, literally at your fingertips. Yet, the programming we receive from birth tells us that this energy is bad, it's shameful, taboo, and dangerous. The dominant messaging from the allopathic medical system is that this part of you, well, all of you, is a flawed machine and can only survive with its constant intervention, which couldn't be further from the truth. For women, it's an onslaught. From puberty, they are put on hormones, which might be for actual birth control, but often it's for period issues or acne, and then they stay on that for decades. And then, strangely, after having their reproductive hormones interfered with for decades, when they actually do decide to get pregnant, they can't. So they take more hormones and pills and interventions. Maybe you're told that you need to sacrifice an organ or two. And then later in life, it's more hormones because, menopause is also a grand flaw in the human body. So the allopathic messaging is that your body is inherently wrong. And only we in the white coats who bend over and say anything for pharmaceutical funding can save you. I saw through this from a young age and have since made alternative and holistic healing my life's work. These are my personal choices and how I run my professional business. My view is that we and our bodies are all powerful. We and our bodies hold all the wisdom, brilliance, and healing potential we could ever need. All we have to do is remove whatever beliefs, obstacles, conditioning, and trauma that obscure this truth. That's why a primary tenet of the Anami philosophy is that everyone can. It's the Anami guarantee. Every woman can have deep, life-changing vaginal orgasms, G-spot, cervical, and squirting ejaculate across the room. Every man can have sex for 8 hours at a time and learn to separate orgasm from ejaculation. Yes, you all can. One of the things I look for in people and teachers is a relentless and holistic commitment to empowering the individual, reminding them that their power lies within. They don't waver and they don't default here and there and they don't make excuses. And this is one of the reasons I recommend so few people in the work that I do, or in general, because I feel that most people have a place they cop out and they cave in to a seemingly easier option or excuse. For example, there are many people in the supposedly holistic women's health field who will get to a certain point and then they recommend artificial hormones or the birth control pill for addressing issues in women's health, or hey, it's okay to use lube if you're menopausal. Their faith in the human body falls short. Kelly Brogan is someone who hits the mark. As a holistic psychiatrist, she has gotten people off of all manner of prescription drugs with her protocols, healing people of everything from schizophrenia to bipolar to depression to Graves' disease through all natural methods. combinations of nutrition and lifestyle, but also of doing the deep inner work that is the true source of the malaise that shows up in the psyche. I have tremendous respect for her and her work and the quality that she has in spades, which is not giving a fuck what other people think of her. Because she is a formidable truth speaker, she has been shunned and blacklisted and censored and targeted in smear campaigns for years. And the irony is that every single thing she puts forth is backed up by science. And the things that she speaks out about typically are not. I heard her speaking on Joe Rogan's podcast a few years ago, and that interview has since been taken down because I guess Joe now reads from a script and is told what to say and gets promptly bitch slapped pretty hard if he strays off course. However, in this interview of a few years ago, she talked about something called consensus medicine. So this is when a bunch of WHO RED bought and paid for doctors or researchers, these are air quotes I'm making, all get together and agree on something, perhaps with some special motivation. Ka-ching! And there's a lot of that around. It's a special agreement medicine rather than actual science. Anyway, I've said before that she is the equivalent to me in the psychiatric realm. Fearless and bold and taken no shit. So I am honored to have her here today. Welcome, Kelly. I'm so excited to have you here.
It's a total pleasure to hang out with you.
So Kelly is one of these people. There are very few people in this realm whose work I wholeheartedly recommend, and she is one of them. And I think it's because I find in her a quality that I see in myself, which is that I am committed to a radically holistic perspective. And I do not bend or waver on the notion that people truly can heal themselves. They don't need surgery. They don't need pharmaceutical drugs. And a lot of people who might be calling themselves integrative or functional or more natural often will default, right? They'll have, oh, it's okay to prescribe hormones. It's okay to prescribe certain things. It's okay to prescribe the birth control to control difficult periods, where I'm in a place where I just reject that entirely. And so is Kelly Brogan. And so she's, put together these protocols where she's been able to heal people through her suggestions of both outer and inner work without resorting to these other measures. And so I have a massive appreciation for that. And she really, truly embodies the concept of not giving a fuck what other people think of her. So welcome, Kelly.
What an intro. Thank you. I remember when I was first doing vaginal kung fu years ago, really getting that deep sense of soul recognition with you, because I know that you also feel that way and you can't fake it. And other people who happen to have come to that radical and immutable and totally reliably consistent belief in the capacity of the human body to heal. I'm hoping we're finding each other right now because it's necessary
Yes.
for us to band together.
So, for the sake of the people in my audience who may or may not know your backstory, can you give us a synopsis of how this happened for you? So, to come from a place of being a psychiatrist and you acknowledge that you were, giving prescriptions, relying on medication, perhaps amongst other things, but I know you definitely did that. And then you had this massive shift over and you put your prescription pad down and that was it. So was there a specific event that did this? Was this an evolution that happened over time? Like, how would you describe your process of being immersed deeply in the system and in psychiatry and now you've come to this total, 180-degree place of rejecting those methods and pioneering an entirely new path?
Yeah.
And how your approach is actually more based on science than what supposedly the other old school methods are.
Yeah. So I have come definitely to look at so much of what we are experiencing as humans through the lens of maturational psychology and specifically, the evolution of trauma response over a lifetime. And so I've become really interested in looking at my own path, having had this kind of experience of being already several people in this lifetime in a very, at least polarized fashion. and to say, how could that be? You know, I'm the same me who was so dedicated, so devoted to allopathic medicine that I specialized as a psychiatrist in prescribing to pregnant and breastfeeding women. That's how necessary, you know, I thought these interventions were. And I reflect on, you know, I was at MIT for college and I volunteered at a suicide hotline. And I had, and still have, so much difficulty tolerating distress and another's distress specifically, that I came into contact with this dynamic relationship with authority, where I could appeal to the psychiatrist who was supervising, you know, the cases that came up in this volunteer hotline to help me to feel better about what somebody else was feeling who was calling, right? And the way that we did that together was to get them, you know, closer to medication, right? Help them get an appointment, help them get into the mental health center, what have you. And so I believe that actually a lot of doctors become doctors because we have so little capacity to be with so-called negative emotions and, you know, experience feeling any degree of comfort with our own fear, that we specialize in, you know, ameliorating, fixing, and of course, subduing and managing other people's distress without so much as a moment's consideration, you know, for why they're having these experiences, what they might mean, and, you know, how they might be empowered to resolve their own challenges or at least better understand them. There's not room for that because we are colluding in this power dynamic, right? We're colluding in the experience of eliminating any extra minutes of feeling badness, right? And so it really wasn't until I had, you know, what is sometimes called a rupture of idealization, right? I had an experience postpartum, my first pregnancy, where I could no longer really resolve the cognitive dissonance that was rattling around inside me, because I definitely was prescribing to pregnant women, pregnant myself, feeling like I would never take one of these meds as a pregnant woman. And that dissonance is very uncomfortable because it almost brings up sort of moral, ethical issues. What am I doing? If I wouldn't do it, why am I doing it, you know, to somebody else? And so it wasn't until I could see, you know, when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, that there was no way for this system to actually give me what I wanted, which was to live without a prescription. I just didn't want to go to CVS every month for the rest of my friggin' life, you know, which is, I knew that that's what Hashimoto's meant. And so in that, you know, sort of with that, you know, sort of incentive, I sought out a naturopath. I resolved my Hashimoto's. At that point, I wasn't meditating. I wasn't doing enemas. I wasn't doing really much of anything other than changing my diet. And I got rid of gluten, dairy, and sugar. I remember this was like 11 plus years ago. And I watched my, you know, antibodies and my TSH come into the normal range on paper. And what lit up inside me was a rage that, you know, flared for years. And that is the kind of, what happens is, you know, when you no longer can see your parentified authority as good, as all good, often you flip to the other side and you end up vilifying them and you see them as all bad. And this power dynamic is exactly the same, of course, and they are still the authority that I need to be good, right? I need them to be good. Listen to me, see how you're wrong. And that went on for a couple of years until I actually started to kind of, like, as Nietzsche says, like, become the monster I was fighting, which, you know, we know in the activism world is very, very possible, if not likely, actually, until and if you begin to understand what your activism and that impulse to fight the bad daddy or bad mommy is really about, and how to engage it with the energy of sovereignty, right? So with the expression of your truth, with the living of your life as if fundamentally equally empowered, if not more empowered, you know, than that which you are exposing. And so that transition didn't happen until my mentor died suddenly in 2015. And it really brought down the house for me because I had never really experienced grief like that, and such a disorientation. And my individuation process, my experience of like, wow, I'm alone, because he was a very much idealized father figure for me, really began, where I had to understand. It's so funny. When I went to his house after he passed away, his bookshelf, this is Nicholas Gonzalez, by the way, his bookshelf, had all the books with their spines facing out, right? And there was, I swear, one book facing with the cover out, and the book's title, I've never even looked it up to find out what this book is actually about, is You're in Charge Now. That's literally what the book I saw
Wow.
facing out. And that was the beginning of me understanding, what it is to take personal responsibility, what it is to, engage in the process of looking inward for the power that I might otherwise source externally. And I'm certainly still on that path. But it was in 2010 that I put down my prescription pad, never started a patient on medications again, and I became very well acquainted through that work with the dark night of the soul. It was almost like a manufactured and induced dark night of the soul as these women were coming off of medications, and I got to see the anatomy of that, and the sort of universal steps of the hero or heroine's journey. And then, of course, I started to experience my own dark nights, and began to see that illusory personality has to die, before you can really come into contact with who it is that you are, that defies all of the identity constructs that you were otherwise kind of stapling and pasting onto yourself, hoping nobody would notice there was a scared child beneath, and so that's a lot of what my work has been dedicated to now, just self-reclamation on the deepest level.
Yeah, and I think our work is very similar in that way, that you, instead of rejecting or trying to bury messages from the body and the psyche, the intention is to take them as information and wisdom and higher messages from the higher self, and then interpret them and then use them for healing. Where, again, that's another place where I'd always seen a parallel in our work, is that many people in my field would be like, oh, the woman's not lubricating, so we give her some artificial lubricant, or the man's having trouble with erection, so we give him some Viagra. Where I would be like, that's not the root cause, and that's a temporary band-aid. And so let's figure out, if the woman, for example, isn't lubricating, she's usually out of touch with her feminine flow and that energy. Like, there's all this beautiful and rich symbolism if we turn our lens on it. And you've done that in your work, where when you just talked about the dark night of the soul, is that by removing those band-aids and those suppressants, is that then we have to acknowledge and look at whatever is there, and then ideally illuminate it and then catalyze it, so that those things that were perhaps weaknesses or fears or disembodied parts of the self, we then integrate, and we become more whole and more self-realized because of it.
Yes. And I think that there's a lot to unwind in the kind of false moralism, that we're socioculturally raised with, to understand that this is bad and this is good, right? So it's bad to feel angry, it's bad to feel sad for too long, it's bad to be out of control. And so, all of the ways that we are conditioned by our parents to suppress these aspects that are otherwise unacceptable or even shameful, those aspects are there, right? So at a certain point, you encounter opportunities to revisit, those pieces of yourself that now as an adult, you are responsible for domesticating and holding hostage. And I think that that's a big part of beginning to attune to what it is that the body, and also, the emotional body, if you will, is attempting to communicate, right? Because if you have pain, if you have diarrhea, if you have brain fog, if you have so-called anxiety, right? If you have, if you're fearful at night and you can't sleep, there is such a deeper layer of self-rejection in trying to fix that, even through natural means, like you're saying, like you could throw a natural lube at somebody or whatever, that cannot be sustained, right? So unless and until and if you are ready to turn toward yourself fundamentally, instead of abandoning yourself in search of the, sort of experience of yourself as good and okay, you're never ever going to escape that emptiness, right? Because it's the empty feeling that is the signal, that there's a part to reclaim. And so I think that that's like such a paradigm shift in understanding what health and emotional experiences are really about. That's why, that's a chief reason I don't give a fuck about what anyone says about me publicly. I really don't.
What's the chief reason?
Is because we're not even in the same dimension. Like there's no conversation to be had. I mean, initially, and I wrote my first book from this energy of like, okay, I'm going to jam as much science, as many references, because I've been a science nut from the get-go, even when I was on the other team. I'm going to jam it all in here, and I'm going to scream from the mountaintops about this information that I didn't know as a prescriber. So if I didn't know, and I went to, Ivy League med school and whatever else, then I'm guessing that most prescribers don't know this. So how could they possibly provide informed consent? It's not possible to be properly and ethically consented by your prescriber. So I'm going to make sure that patients have the information, and then no one's ever going to take an antidepressant again. Well, guess what? That's not what happened. I actually have had friends tell me, can you believe that, my friend read your book and then she actually was like, oh, that's so interesting. But, I think I'm going to take Lexapro. It's not about information, because to step into this paradigm that we're speaking of, first of all, you have to be called into it, I believe. You have to be willing to take massive risks. You have to be willing to lose everything, including your feeling of belonging, your experience of tribe and family, and the identity that has been your primary shield against all that you perceive as a threat in the world. That is not for everyone, and certainly not something that you can wake up on a Friday and be like, okay, now I'm going to go get on my journey. So my sense is, having really tried to study like what makes somebody ready to wake up, my sense is that you get to a point where the experience of, self-abandonment is so painful and so suffocating that you are ready to jump, right? And so how you're ready is that like you take a step in the direction of change and you feel relief just with the movement. I think relief is the first indication, that you are destined to walk into the wild unknown of your unlived experience, because it's the indicator from your body even that you're coming home. And so it's like just signing up for one of your programs or mine or whatever. Like I've been told so many times, like that's when the healing began, like, the exhale starts. And otherwise, I don't know, because I certainly know that this is not an info war. I certainly know that, and now more than ever, right, that it's not a deficiency of information that is keeping anyone stuck and arrested in, disempowerment, helplessness, or dependency on an authoritarian system that does not have their best interests at heart. It's not that. So what is it? And I think it's really this readiness to be experienced as bad by some people, right? Judged, condemned, left, rejected, abandoned. And to know that as long as you stay with yourself, with your principles, with the feeling in your body, as long as you are willing to turn towards your own fear, your own shame, your own guilt, and just allow it to be. Just allow it to be, to really get to know when that started in your life, where are the roots of those feelings, then you don't have as much of a need to play the game you were playing of like kind of taking the crumbs, and mostly starving in your life for that kind of like these surrogate hits for validation that really can only come from you.
I love that. And, I've seen in my own experience and observation that the price of admission is courage, right?
Mm.
Like, I believe that everybody gets given these opportunities, these windows, these portals that offer themselves. And the person has the ability to step into them or to be like, not right now, right? And then keep going. And I believe that every person, no matter what circumstance they're in their life, they have that come to them, like spiritually, energetically, as just like a law of the universe. That's why we're here. And then the people who do step through, like, to me, the universe rewards courage. And so when we take those steps, the universe starts to support us, right? The universe starts to participate and co-create that journey with us. And even if we're going through things that are difficult and painful, and dark night of soul to me is often like a rebalancing of karma, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's, I've heard this phrase of like this, it's called like the cave of fire in some spiritual paths, where often when you start your journey, you go, it's like almost on another dimension into this cave of fire, where you're then going through this purification, right? Where a lot of that ugliness and darkness comes up to the surface, and your job is, you just have to go through it. It's like doing a cleanse, right? So you do a 10-day cleanse, and often day 2 or 3, can be, you feel the yuckiest, where all of the toxins are coming out, and you feel them and you feel off. And once you get past that, then you feel amazing. You can feel better than you ever have in your life. But if you don't go through those few days or a few years or whatever it might be, then you never get to the other side. And, it's interesting to me, like so many, I guess what's confusing, and I see it now playing out at large, and then I've seen it over the years in people who are really in allopathic medicine, how so many of those people have never done the questioning. Like, instead of actually, they basically just take what's spoon fed to them and assume that the science is settled, and they've never bothered to dig deeper into that. And I also see, so I don't know if I've really ever met a really, really happy allopathic physician. Honestly, all the ones I've met who have gotten to know deeper were like miserable, often addicted to substances. Like, I went on a surf trip, and there was these 3 American doctors on the boat, and they had giant bags so they were on holiday, on a surf holiday in tropical waters. They all have their giant bags of pills. They've got morning pills, they've got afternoon pills, they've got evening pills, they've got, oh, this will be better for surfing pills. Like, we were just like, dumbstruck. We couldn't believe it. And miserable, really miserable guys. And that's, I've met several, been in several situations and seen that up close. And to me, the way I see that is that they know that in their work, they're really not healing people, right? They're not healing them. They're potentially actually harming them. If, at best, they're just maintaining them. And and that there's that massive cognitive dissonance, and that's how they're, is dealing with that pain, is burying it, because the truth is they're really not healing people.
Yeah, I mean, the victim persecutor savior triangle is highly operative in that belief system. And so whenever you're orienting around this concept of the victim, which, I've said and will say again that I do believe that victim consciousness is the only human pathology, because it
Yeah.
it's founded on a lie, which is that we are powerless, and that we are helpless, instead of just feeling that way, from echoes of an experience of our childhood. And as adults, when we participate in this concept of the victim, who needs to be saved against, some bad aggressor, random aggressor from the outside, everyone is carrying, you flip flop around the whole triangle all the time, because everyone is carrying that energy of disempowerment, even the savior, right? So if the doctor is the savior, the patient is the victim, and the persecutor is, interestingly, often the body, right? Or maybe it's a germ or a bad gene or whatever it is. it's threaded through with this concept that badness is random, that, you know, you as a savior are obligated to find your worth in applying yourself and your self-abandonment to someone else's well-being, or, you know, that there is such a thing as a bad guy who could get us at any moment. I mean, it's a hellish dimension to occupy, right? And when you exit that, you know, because as some MDs have, you find like, wow, life is so much more interesting. It's so much more dynamic when I myself, and, you know, I encourage others to respond with curiosity to adversity that might, you know, emerge from their lifescape, and to find meaning in the various challenges, you know, that come our way. Because, you know, the only person in that narrative that can truly decode what it is that's being delivered is the person experiencing it. Well, isn't that nice and tidy, right? Because then we just each take care of ourselves to the very best of our ability. And then we get to just simply be co-present to each other and support each other without actually having to fundamentally prioritize somebody in this kind of like false saviorhood. And it's such a liberation to step out of that. I mean, it's really, I mean, obviously it's been referred to as a cult, and for good reason. It's a hierarchical model that is founded on, you know, the experience of pain and abuse. I mean, my training was a horrendous chronic trauma in my life, you know, that I probably attracted and was interested in to revisit, you know, this deep feeling of powerlessness and resentment, you know, and, you know, whatever else, rage that I hadn't otherwise made contact with until I became an intern and a resident. I mean, I was like always in power struggles and battles I was like the bad kid, you know, the scapegoat
Right.
all the time. And, you know, that hierarchical model is designed for one thing, which is consistent compliance and obedience with a power structure that subdues the masses into order. And it has nothing to do with your story, your health, your experience. You are, you know, room 204C, the hepatitis case. I mean, that's literally what you are. And that's not because any of the people involved are fundamentally sociopaths or interested in dehumanizing, you know, their fellow, you know, citizens. It's simply the nature of the, you know, the belief field that is held in that system. And there's no way out. You know, when I was prescribing, I never one time ever helped to facilitate remission or cure, ever. It is not even a promise that is offered by that system. So, you know, it's like if you go to the butcher, don't expect to learn about vegan resources, right? So if the experience of healing, whatever that might mean, integrating, recapturing, reclaiming, is not on sale at that store, then why do we go there? We go there, you know, because we want to feel taken care of. We want to be told what to do. And because we are afraid and we don't know how to be with our fear without needing it to go away. And so, you know, that's why I believe that the basic protocol that I have, there's really nothing too special about it. However, it's over the years generated a field, you know, as have yours, a field of almost ritual empowerment, you know, that is conferred to the participants. And what happens in this program is that you commit with fierce discipline and self-attention to making choices that are dynamically disruptive to your default mode network, right? To that automatic pilot you've been in for so many years of your own victimhood. And as you begin to feel different, you cannot unsee the fact that you are the reason that you feel different, that your choices actually led you to this place. And how could that be true if the doctor knows better about you than you do? The science says it's not possible what just happened for you. And if fundamentally, you didn't even get a proper diagnosis or treatment, to get to where you got, right? So you can do this entirely on your own. So it defies so much dogma, that we are then again presented with that fork, right? Where we can pretend it didn't happen, or we can say, okay, this must mean a lot of what I've been believing has been, wrong at best, and self-abusive at worst.
I think what's great and what I think happens with people stepping into your work or my work is that they know something is off. Like there's something in the answers that they're getting or non-answers they're getting from the traditional allopathic world, but they don't know what the right answers are because they've never heard them or seen them. And so they can't articulate, they don't have a vocabulary for something that they don't even, a language they don't know exists. They have kind of an intuition that this isn't quite right, or this doesn't seem right. So what, I can never be healed, right? Like women get told these things like, oh, like you have to take out your uterus, or in your case, like you have to be on medication for the rest of your life. This thing is like a lifelong sentence. It can never be fixed, right? And I think something within us, if we're not completely under the spell, is just like, really? Like that's the best you can do. That is the best you can do, really? And then when they hear something or they read something and they get a glimmer of another path, and then like something in them, the truth, right, lights up, as long as they've got some remaining connection to that ability to discern. And then they take another, they take a step, and then they take another step. And I think it becomes this beautifully exciting journey that once you get that validation of the truth that's been struggling to emerge within you, then you're pretty much on your way. I think like it would be hard to, really shut that down unless you're, I don't know, maybe you're surrounded by a lot of people who criticize you and condemn you. And then I think that's that critical moment of, okay, you seize that courage and you step forward anyway, right? Despite other people's opinions or thoughts. And then you earn your own self-realization, which to me is really what life is all about. But, it's shocking to see like so many people, like, we've talked about this, and I know you talk about this, like where the doctor with their their robe, it's kind of akin to this priest, right? Like like the intermediary between you and God is a priest, and the intermediary between you and your body is a doctor. And you're not thou shalt not go there by thyself, right? Like they have to interpret for you. And whereas like I know with both you and my work, like the intention is, I will teach you some things and show you some things, and then you're on your own. Like, I don't want you to be dependent on me. I don't want a business model that brings you back all the time. I want you to take these tools and then run with them, and you can, right? And so it's a beautiful unfoldment process, but it's really like it, what you're saying about like, it's not an information lack, because all this information is out there, especially now with the internet. And, despite the amount of censorship that's there, if you have a modicum of research skills and, curiosity, you can find it. Anybody can. And that's why when people like, it's kind of hard for me to have a lot of compassion for people who don't, because it's a deliberate choice to remain ignorant or sick or as victim. Like, I love that idea that the only true pathology is victimhood. Like, it's amazing.
Right? Because it's the fundamental root of disempowerment. And the paradox of the fact that we have world creating power, and it's like that we're God and we're also not, that we are this kind of, I'm like this little Kelly, but that I also have all of the elements that are comprise the divine. And so how is it that I could be this powerless entity here to just suffer and struggle um, flounder around until I die? Like, is that really what I incarnated for? Or is it this reclamation? I mean, reclamation for me is the biggest ticket item, right? Like and I know it's not for everyone, you know, for different people, different journeys, might be, you know, might be a different carrot at the end of the stick. But for me, that experience of, like you said, like remembering, reclaiming, like reconnecting to something that I already knew but forgot in my slumber, that feeling is so, it's almost addictive, right? Like once you
Yeah.
start to do this work and you know that pain is an indicator that some part you're asleep to some part of yourself, then you know to move towards it, because on the other end, like you said, is the fulfillment and gratification of reclamation, which is like nothing else in the world. And you know, that's why I agree so much that our best energy and efforts are in focusing on exposing what's possible. And that shift happened for me, you know, I don't know, around 2015 or so, where I really put down my sword. I stopped writing anti-pharma blogs and I said, you know what, I'm just going to focus on testimonials and on, you know, the fact that, you know, you can heal Graves' disease, you can heal schizophrenia, you can heal so-called bipolar disorder, you can heal migraines, you can heal lupus, you know. And I set to publishing these cases, with a team of volunteers, to, you know, putting videos out there of people who are courageous enough to tell their story in such a, you know, stigmatized realm, so that people can make contact with, on a heart level, with what is possible for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more difficult to take the bait of the small choice, right? Because you don't have a choice until you know you have a choice. But once
Yeah.
you know you have a choice, then
Yeah.
you're actually making one, even if you're defaulting in powerlessness to a familiar, you know, sort of path or road. But it does require recognizing, you know, that the spell of scientism, right? The indoctrination is very, very, very deep. It's a conditioning, you know, that's now several hundred years, you know, if you want to look at it that way, in the making, that, you know, it's going to be super scary to imagine that you could also be in this category of dogma defying outcomes, right? And not be burned at the stake or not be condemned and ostracized. Because, you know, scientism, like you said about the robes in the temple or whatever, scientism is the dominant religion on this planet right now. And
Yeah.
that's why we have watched all other religions, you know, bow, you know, to what it is that we call, the religion of scientism. You know, that's why you have the Dalai Lama, you know, eating, what was it, like lamb or something, whatever, you know, because his doctor said he needs to, you know, and the transgression of so many other, theological commitments and beliefs and practices, you know, when they, you know, conflict with what it is that modern medicine suggests is actually necessary. And never more have we seen that, you know, than in, you know, the closing of churches and everything else, because of a so-called virus. So it's important to recognize, you know, that this is it's a spiritual matter, you know, at its core. And, you know, to engage in that kind of a battlefield, is, it does take a tremendous amount of courage, and you can't not do it if you're already destined to do it, you know. So if you're on the path, if you're listening to this, you know that what's being presented to you is an opportunity, to reclaim that power and to truly experience self-ownership, not only on the level of bodily sovereignty and autonomy, but also on the emotional level of understanding that, you know, you are here, you've got to get you, you know, you've got to have your own back, fundamentally first, you know, before you, can ask that anybody else do that for you.
Yep. And I think, what I was saying before too, like when you start to step onto that path and the universe just, you make waves, like everything, the vibration of everything begins to change. Like the universe then supports that courage and those choices, and your life begins to change. But if you don't make those choices, you just remain stuck or go backwards, right? Like grow or die, because there is no such thing as just staying in one place. If you're not growing, you're dying. And if you're not actively moving forward, you're going backward. But that's what I love. I call it the escalator effect, is that once you get on that, you take that step, is the universe provides this escalator and then helps you move along. But you have to take that step. And that's it to me. I just boil it down to courage.
Yeah. And what is it like, because a lot of people, I'm sure reflect to you and reflect to me and others, who have audacious public platforms, that, oh, wow, like you're so courageous. And what's interesting to me is that, my work is not where I tap into that personally, like speaking in this way is something I must do to feel safe in the world, actually.
To feel
And
safe in the world, describe that. What's
yeah,
that
meaning
about?
that
Yeah.
if I don't use whatever it is I've been given, to do this with ease, because this is not hard for me, no aspect of what I have done in my, other than medical school and training, but, in my sort of like post-awakened life, no aspect of this has felt like work. And no aspect of it has even honestly been challenging. It would be far more challenging if somebody broke my computer, took a pen and paper away from me and said, you're done expressing yourself, for the rest of your life. I would wither up and die probably. So this is a catharsis. It's a way for me to resolve invisibility. It's a way for me to feel less alone. And it's a way for me to use my power to subdue or at least challenge, what it is that I might otherwise perceive as a threat out there in the world, the forces that be or whatever. If I'm not fighting the fight, then they're much more likely to come get me, I guess is the kind of like subliminal track that's running. The ways in which I experience, so courage never feels like necessarily going with the flow of what's already coming out.
Right.
The feeling I've had of when I have felt courageous in my life, is when it's like jumping into a freezing cold lake or something. Like it's like, it's that feeling of like just taking a massive leap and not knowing to any extent, what might be on the other end of it, but knowing that the cost of, like you said, of staying perched on that, launch pad or whatever is a kind of pain that you can no longer endure. And so the risk is worth taking, but it's like a leap. And in the leap, it's like you fall to pixels, like it's like you fall to bits and you feel a bit like you're dying, and a lot of the most courageous moments I have had have been in my mothering, where I have really, really shown up in a way for, my daughters, and particularly my one, very empathic and expressive daughter, unlike my very suppressed daughter who has adopted a lot of my defense mechanisms. It's when I don't take the bait of my own ego, that says, in order to be in control right now, do this, right? In order to stay safe, do this. And I do something different. And, that is often what courage feels like. There's like a little whisper, I think, that says, this time, just do it this way. It's going to be fine. Like you'll have another chance later. It's like the devil on your shoulder kind of a thing. And there's got to be that part of you that will risk shame, will risk being wrong. I think that's a huge, huge, huge disincentive to engaging in courageous behavior. and that will tap into this trust that you are navigating yourself um, from a dimension, like a higher dimension, right? Your higher self, if you want to call it that, and not from the known spaces. If that makes sense. Like it's like
Yeah.
you're pledging allegiance to some compass, that you can't even necessarily see. And once you have a little contact with it, it becomes easier and easier and easier, to engage it. But initially, it's quite harrowing.
It's really beautifully said. I love that. Like this pledging allegiance to this compass, because it feels like that. You're pledging allegiance to me, it's integrity. Like it's some kind of integrity or honesty wrapped up with courage that calls you. And you just feel your way towards it. But then once you get there, it gets easier and easier. And then you're right. It's like this higher force is now guiding your life. So I love all of that. So in my work, one of the big milestones that I've observed both in myself and then through years of working with women is that when they do their sexual work, and so they do their deep excavation and their block clearing and their demon hunting, and they really own and claim their sexual selves and begin to embody that, one of the qualities that they inevitably get to is not giving a fuck, right? So where they don't care what other people think of them, they're not trying not to care, they just don't care, right? Like they go out and do things like women going to these like nude beaches, and where they were previously like really ashamed of their bodies, like just being fully naked, like with their teenage daughter, and just like, or telling people things, expressing their opinions, and just not quitting their jobs like out of the blue, but just because they have their life force energy, their sexual energy is now thriving and moving them forward. And so that's always been, then a way that I assess in a way like where people are at. Like if they've hit that place, I'm like, she's good, right? Like there's no going back now once they're at that place. So have you noticed anything in this whole, arena of people stepping into their power and getting to that place of not caring anymore, not giving a fuck what other people think of them? Any tie-ins with their sexual development? I know you send a lot of people to me, but like,
Yeah.
so you may or may not see the results of that. But
Totally.
if you have, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, that's very true. I kind of focus my work on the ritual portal, right? So like, here's your doorway, and I'll tell you how to walk through it, and then you're on your own. The the experience that so many women I've known, kind of post time in my practice, let's say, or through Vital Mind Reset, is that often they engage in kind of erotic integration or sexual personal intimacy, and this kind of exploration, often because they get to a point where they actually want more pleasure in their life. And, whereas they might have found my program because they want less pain, I think that there's something really beautiful about getting to a place where you actually are, incentivized and inspired by increasing and expanding the pleasure in your life, which intuitively we know will be sourced from our own bodies, our own self-intimacy, and our own self-knowledge. And that, it has very little to do with our partner. It has, little to do with any of the stories we've told ourselves. Like so many of the women, you won't be surprised to hear this, but that I've worked with have been like so-called anorgasmic, right? Like have never had an orgasm in their life. And of course, in conventional allopathy, that's a pathology with an ICD-10 code and everything else. But could there be conditions of safety that are set by the woman herself to foster this, sort of reclamation of the bliss technology that the body is, the reclamation of the capacity to simply source, that kind of, like you said, vital force through self-knowledge and self-intimacy on the body dimension, but certainly also in understanding that we have to learn how to create safety. I often describe like the elements of VMR as just being a way to send a signal of safety so that you can simply begin the process of exploring that which has felt like it might kill you otherwise previously. And, I think there's also, I don't know, 100% of the women I ever worked with in my practice have sexual abuse histories. And
did you say 100%?
100%. Yes.
100%.
Every single woman I've ever worked with. And, the range has been from, heinous, like the most heinous. And in fact, I wrote in Own Yourself about with her consent, about one of my patients' experiences that I still can barely think of without like shuddering. Just like how horrific an experience a little girl can be born into, all the way to, something that might be considered like, inappropriate touch by, like a amusement park guy, like a
right.
ticket taker or whatever, and then there were also other layers of physical, emotional abuse, etc. And so the role of that kind of trauma healing is very much tied into experiencing safety with one's own body and beginning to acknowledge that pleasure is actually not a danger signal, right? So kind of like unentwining those two elements. And, it doesn't have to be, and I think a lot of people don't want to look at their trauma and don't want to do trauma work because they imagine they're going to have to like relive it and be back in that space and, feel 6 inches tall with these looming entities and demons all around them. The difference is, at least in the way that I have approached this work, is that you already know how to take care of that child, as the adult who has encased, the child herself. You already know. And once you simply turn towards her experience and offer her what it is that you, as your own child, that you didn't get in those moments, which is simply validation and a kind of comforting and soothing and reassurance that any, sentient woman would know to offer, a child in distress, that begins to heal. And so then the experience of, sort of hands on your body and practices to engage dimensions of your body that you never even thought to be conscious of becomes another way to see what comes up, and if things come up, you engage that same practice of being with whatever it is, that is coming up. But I have, I've had my own experience to know that coming back into the body is, it feels like often a very dangerous place to be, not only because of all the imprints that often, are stored here, trauma imprints, but because it feels like getting out of the mind means that you're vulnerable. And of course, I need to tell you that that's one of the grossest misunderstandings of what it is to be a woman. Because until and if this body becomes your command center, it becomes the instrument for, your yes and your no. And it fundamentally informs you of, what it is that you need to know in a given moment. You're operating from self-abuse. You're operating from the dimension of your trauma field of abuse, except you're the one who's actually delivering it to yourself now. And so this opportunity to defy, whatever programs and fears that might say, stay up here, because down here is for later, down here is for, when I have time or whatever. No, down here, this whole experience of the full spectrum of what it is that your body has to offer you, is where your power lies. And I have found, that there are dimensions of, even myself that I have, I reached out to you recently to ask, about like a sex coach. Like I want to kind of like really put my attention on what it is that I'm not seeing, at this stage, in my 40s or whatever. And, already it's apparent to me that one of the, because a lot of women feel inhibited, let's say, like this is like a common experience, like we feel inhibited, even by ourselves. I'm a dancer. I dance every day. I love dancing. And do I ever dance by myself in front of a mirror? Never. Literally never. Why? Do I know that that would be like super therapeutic to offer that to myself, that experience? Yes, I do. And I feel inhibited. So, what is that experience of unsafety conferring to the rest of my life? I know that it's conferring a lot. And that's what I want to deconstruct, because there is a, a wild woman in there who I know is entrapped by so much conditioning around my emotional life that I see my sexuality is, caged by that as well. Like, for example, I'll just say briefly, like, I don't like drama queens. All right. Like, I don't like hysterical women who are out of control, and it doesn't have to be women. No, men are even worse. But I don't like the energy of hysteria. And that is why I have developed an entire personality around equanimity, around, I don't know, maintaining my faculties of executive functioning and articulation, even when I am afraid. It's why I never lose my cool. I have never screamed at anyone. I have never thrown anything. I have never lost it like that, ever. And is that because that's the whole of who I am? Probably not, because I wouldn't be so triggered by these individuals, including sometimes my own daughter, who express in tantrum form, who express in this way, when I want to have a calm conversation that is highly intellectual about what's going on. And I want to stay in the field of rationality for me to feel safe, right? So if I'm going to disavow the part of me that was probably told when I was a child not to express myself in too big a way, right? Or I would lose love. If I'm going to hide that drama queen inside myself, what else am I hiding, right? Well, I'm probably also hiding a whole dimension of my sexuality and sexual expression that would be liberated if and when, I could simply acknowledge that I have this in me, and turn my attention and love towards this part of me that I've been ashamed of. And that's why I have judged and blamed outside of me this very quality, in my partner, in my mom, in my daughter, and in so many friends I have attracted over, over the years. And so I am fascinated by the journey that is, sexual reclamation and sexual healing, and how it can begin as, as quickly as you are incentivized to bring more more dimensions of pleasure into your life. And it doesn't need to be because you're running from, experiences of trauma or pain that you want to fix or heal.
Yeah, I agree that the path through the body, like, well, that the answers are at our fingertips, right? And so the body is a huge vessel, both from, as we're saying, the pain messages, but through pleasure as well. Like through connecting into the body. Yeah, I mean, both for me, like in terms of physical exercise and activity, like anything that grounds me into my body, and sexually speaking, those have been massive portals for me of awakening that have been like, wow, my body has all these amazing things that it can do that bring me closer to myself and to my spirit through the body. So All right, so where can people dive deeper into your work if they would like to? I know that you have an amazing online community where you have all kinds of resources that are especially pertinent right now, everything from cryptocurrency to homesteading and gardening. Where would you send people for any aspects of what we've discussed?
Yes. Well, what I love about, our alliance is how complementary, our work really is. I mean, um, there's many dimensions of my work in your work, but just about none of yours in mine. So, that's why I send so many people your way. However, the deep dive program, Vital Mind Reset, that is my protocol. It's in all my books. It's online. There's many ways to access it. Um, is, kind of my primary offering, and certainly my most evidence-based and research offering. But otherwise, we have a community, it's really focused on medical freedom, on bodily sovereignty, and on this perspective around health. And then we kind of walk the walk of taking small steps each month toward, toward the actual lived experience of this kind of sovereignty through lifestyle choices, self-care, and then, these kinds of unhooking from the system kind of practices, getting off smartphone, etc. But yeah, I'm over, these days newsletter is the only way to keep up because we're doing the censorship shuffle, and who even knows? I mean, my Telegram channel, we could find out tomorrow that, we gotta run. So it's a funny time, but it's also, one to have faith that we're going to find each other and we're going to get the information we need, maybe not in the ways we imagined, but that the resources will appear, in front of our eyes at the right moment.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim.
The keys to the queendom are within. The path to well-fucked sovereignty, self-actualization, and not giving a fuck are found through giving lots of fucks to yourself. Through the tending of your own emotional and sexual garden and clearing space and allowing the most fertile parts of you to grow. The How to Be a Well-Fucked Woman Salon begins in late July. It is the how to live and love in a female body education that you ought to have received but did not. I show you how to tap into your full sexual and orgasmic potential and own all of your sexual self using everything from breast massage, sexual polarity work to really activate your feminine energy, quantum techniques to heal trauma, sexual trauma in particular, and learning how to channel your sexual energy into your life as a creative superpower. We will dive into all of the deeper, life-changing vaginal orgasms, plus how to use sex acts as pathways to enlightenment. You can find the free preview video series at kimanami.com under Sexual Savant Salons, and then look for The Well-Fucked Woman. I will put the salon link below this video. Come one, come all.